Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Sarah Wong. Our top stories tonight. Hong Kong's daily infections dropped slightly below 1,000, but outbreaks at elderly homes triggered concern. Restaurants feel the pinch under new vaccine mandate, while newlyweds struggle to cope with ever-changing COVID rules. And millions of Indians in the north cast their ballots in a key state election. Hong Kong's COVID tally went up by almost 1,000 today, slightly lower than yesterday. Outbreaks in a growing number of elderly homes continue to put authorities on edge. Wong has the latest.
Hong Kong's daily tally went down slightly today, landing at 986 cases, compared with yesterday's over 1,000. Outbreaks in a growing number of elderly homes continue to be a big source of worry for health authorities. Newly discovered cases today include an employee at Tang Tat Home for Elder in Kwai Chung, who tested preliminary positive for COVID, and a kitchen staffer from the Ho Yok Ching Willow Lodge in Tai Kok Tsui. At One Lun Home for Elderly in Sham Shui Po, 3 other cases were discovered in residents. An elderly man who lived there died in hospital earlier this week after testing positive for the virus. Authorities are now considering evacuating the entire building and sending everyone into isolation. There was also an additional death this afternoon, a 94-year-old unvaccinated woman who tested positive for the Omicron variant. With the medical sector under increasing pressure as local cases soar, suggestions are coming from left, right, and center on how to deal with patients and close contacts.
Currently, we are very closely monitoring the situation of how the epidemic is developing, and also we are going to strategize how we handle people who are infected or close contacts, the environment for their treatment and isolation or quarantine. So we have already implemented modification in our measures in, for example, introducing home quarantine for close contacts and also family members of close contacts, and also using Penny's Bay, which is usually previously a quarantine facilities to house patients with mild symptoms. So we are gradually modifying the hardware that we have to accommodate different kind of people in need.
Health authorities again called on people to get vaccinated and go for the 3rd dose if they're eligible. Wong, HKIBC.
A nursing trainer who contracted COVID may have infected at least 5 elderly patients at Korea's medical center. The patients, all above 70 and suffering from long-term illnesses, were from the same ward. None of them were vaccinated. The trainer visited the ward on Monday, giving guidance to new nurses. After inspecting the ward tonight, government advisor Yun Kwok-yong believed that patients had inhaled airborne droplets, as the female instructor has spoken for a long time. At least 1 nurse was also infected. Her colleagues must conduct rapid tests before work, but don't need to be isolated. A vaccine mandate which kicked in today at thousands of Type D restaurants has hit the industry hard, and even famous eateries are suspending operations to cut losses. Meanwhile, couples can still tie the knot, but they can only share the joy with 2 witnesses on their big day. Johina Chen reports.
While weddings are synonymous with big crowds and celebrations, there was no such privilege for recent newlyweds. COVID restrictions, which changed 3 times in the past 2 days, tested whether love is truly patient and kind. After an outright ban, authorities changed their mind by allowing weddings of no more than 20 attendees. The rule was amended again last night, specifying that apart from the bride and the groom, only 2 witnesses and an officiant can be present at the ceremony. This woman, who was barred from her sister's wedding, said she showed up anyway, hoping to catch a glimpse of her sibling walking down the aisle from afar. The groom said they only found out about the amended rule after receiving a call from the marriage registry this morning. They had been worried about a cancellation. But the trouble was not over, as they now had to find out if their banquet can go ahead as scheduled. The restrictions were part of the government's latest round of social distancing measures, which came into effect today. Only a handful of mostly regular customers showed up at the iconic London Chinese restaurant in Mong Kok for their morning dim sum fix. The Yum Cha eatery, one of the largest of its kind in Hong Kong, is one of 3,273 premises sticking to a so-called Type D mode of operation. A vaccine mandate for customers kicked in today for Type D restaurants, 2 weeks ahead of their counterparts. There were mixed reactions to the new arrangement, with some upset that their unvaccinated friends could not join them for a meal. Restaurant manager Mr. So noted business was down to just 5% of pre-COVID times. He revealed that 2 floors of his multi-story restaurant were shut, adding some staff have already been placed on unpaid leave. The restaurant has decided to halt operations this weekend until the situation improves. Johanna Chan, HKIBC.
While hundreds of close contacts have begun home isolation in the new scheme, authorities have been urged to go one step further by allowing patients with mild symptoms to stay at home. Leading government advisor Wong also proposed placing unvaccinated elderly people in isolation to protect them. Macy Mock reports.
With Hong Kong experiencing its worst COVID outbreak since the pandemic began 2 years ago, a top government advisor has proposed a bold solution to save the public healthcare system from total collapse. Speaking on radio, infectious disease expert Wong suggested a reverse isolation approach. Instead of removing those infected from the community, he said high-risk individuals such as unvaccinated elderly citizens should be sent to an isolation facility. He gave the Asia World Expo as an example of where they can be housed. And with COVID treatment facilities fast filling up, Yoon said the next realistic step could only be asking patients with mild symptoms to stay at home. The expert also felt it was unnecessary to entirely evacuate elderly homes linked to patients. An alternative solution Yoon suggested is to place care homes under lockdown and administer regular tests on residents. He added it would take 7 to 14 days to observe the effectiveness of the latest round of social distancing measures, which kicked in today. Asked whether the city requires a blanket lockdown like the ones imposed overseas, the microbiologist said he was never against the idea, but questioned whether it was feasible. If you can deliver 3 meals a day to 3 million households and arrange dedicated transportation for people visiting clinics and hospitals, then it is possible, he said. Maisie Mock, HKIBC.
The University of Hong Kong's medical school projected that if a citywide lockdown is imposed, COVID transmissions can be reduced by 85%. It suggested that the government consider the feasibility of a full lockdown. The most extreme of 5 scenarios is simulated. If a full lockdown is implemented, the size of the Omicron outbreak would be limited, with only around 115 deaths by June. But it warned a resurgence is likely shall the government lift any restrictions when positive cases still exist in the city.
What we need is to really reduce cross-infection. And the sure way of doing that is to reduce mobility and mixing. And you need to sustain that for as long as you need to bring the number of seeds, infected seeds or transmission chains in the community down to such a level that they will just fade away naturally, as opposed to going into a recrudescence and growing again, and essentially merely delaying the inevitable, as opposed to really extinguishing those seeds.
Tens of millions of voters from the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh lined up in the bitter cold to cast their ballots in state elections. The polls are widely seen as the benchmark of popularity for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party, which dominated the key battleground 5 years ago. Voters in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh braved the winter cold to choose a new government and their representatives in the National Assembly. Over 150 million people in the country's most populous state are eligible for the 7-phase elections. The stakes are high in UP, a key battleground where electoral victory almost guarantees accession to national leadership. As the COVID pandemic hammered Asia's third-largest economy, livelihood issues are the priorities of many.
What I expect from the government to initiate some concrete steps to increase the employment.
The northern province is the political cradle of several Indian prime ministers, including incumbent Narendra Modi. Analysts are treating the state polls as a midterm referendum on Modi's government, underpinned by Hindu nationalism. Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath from the ruling BJP party is seeking to trump his opponents to clinch a second term. The BJP is speeding up the construction of the Ram temple on a disputed land where a demolished mosque once stood to court its Hindu base.
Thoroughly, I think it has outlived its potential. They cannot whip up passion in the name of the Ayodhya temple anymore. It may become a huge pilgrimage spot and lovely tourist spot, which is what they are now trying to build.
That remains to be seen next month when the votes are counted to reveal the political popularity of the BJP. And coming up after the break. Frustration grows at U.S.-Canada border as truckers continue to block key arteries in an anti-vaccine mandate protest.